talk about discrimination, right egalitarianism, and left egalitarianism. This is going to be part 4 or 5 of a longer series that I'm putting together, but I'm going to post this first separately. I've been coming up with these ideas through correspondence with a friend of mine, so I can't take full credit for what I'm producing because it's all been made with plenty of help and advice and, just discussions that develop these ideas much further than you can do in isolation. Even if you've got the greatest library in the world, you got to bounce ideas back and forth off people that you agree with on most things but disagree on a few things. So that's I think like the perfect workflow for ideas. So Christianity has a hard, impenetrable core of egalitarianism in its ideology, and that is the value of every soul before God. God values, according to Christianity, God values your soul and my soul the same. He wants us both to be saved and brought into His loving embrace. But if He had to choose between one or the other, and you were a rocket scientist and I was a mass murderer, a child molester, something like that, there wouldn't really be any a way to discriminate between the value of those two souls. The sins are bad. The accomplishments are good, charity, good works, whatever those things are, that's all good. But the value of the soul itself is the same from person to person. That's egalitarianism. But it's restricted essentially in Christianity just to that. That's about the extent of it historically. Now, when the Renaissance happens, we're not going to get into all that, but you begin to see spreading throughout the elite culture of the West a different kind of notion. And the word humanism that you may have come across from time to time emphasizes that the value, what you need to consider from person to person is their humanity, their human character, which is what? It's the same for all these different people. They share that in common. So it's kind of like taking the Christian principle of the equality, the equal value of all these souls before God, stripping out God, stripping out the soul, and now saying everyone who's human, there's sort of an equal value here. And you can see how this notion leads into the destruction of the traditional, hierarchical, aristocratic, noble values, and the consolidation of those ideas between the years, let's say 1500 and 1789, let's say, that's what Nietzsche's reacting to specifically when he's writing about how Christianity is this disgusting, corrosive disease that pits out and what would you say? It decomposes the strength of a society, a nation, a race, or a people, and it destroys beauty. So you could see how there could be like a pathological form of Christianity, which is probably the most dominant form today, in fact, in which you're emphasizing only what all people have in common, and you're covering up or trying to destroy the ways in which they differ. Give me a minute, I'll be right back. Try to pick up my thoughts. So, if Nietzsche had lived in the year 1100, his criticisms would have been totally absent. He wouldn't have been able to come up with any of that stuff. Because when he would have looked at his Christian society in Europe, he would have seen hierarchy, he would have seen strength, he would have seen discrimination, and he would have seen the church crushing its enemies with the sword. He would have seen the church killing people that challenged it. All right? So there's this historical trajectory, and I would say that by the time you get to where Christianity has been essentially defanged and semi-modernized by these influences coming out of the Renaissance, then you've got right egalitarians, and that's what a lot of our Christians seem to be today. So they are right in some sense in that they recognize maybe natural law or they recognize, oligarchs and certain groups who are trying to destroy the West. Nevertheless, they have internalized the equal value of humans, not before God, but in a practical, material, physical, social sense. And that's a problem, because it's bullshit. It's garbage. It's not true. Let me take care of this little fella, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, let's see if we can complete this in a different place in order to avoid waking up my child. You can probably fill in the blanks yourself on the right egalitarians. They tend to believe, and this changes from group to group and person to person, but they hold out in the strength of their unifying central principle, whether it's capitalism, democracy, or Christianity, of their whatever their persuasion is, that this idea, if it could be spread broadly enough and accepted widely enough, then the differences between people would fall apart and disappear. So you can imagine civic nationalists saying, we've got problems with some immigrant group, and it's because of their values, and if we could get the Somalis to become good capitalists and good Christians, then all of the problems that the native population would have with that group, that would just disappear. Swedes and Pakistanis, or Swedes and Afghans, or whatever they are, they would all be living in perfect harmony and achieving the exact same level of material and intellectual success if they were either Christians or Democrats or capitalists or all three, whatever it happened to be. By contrast, the left egalitarians pursue equality itself as the thing which will bring about equality. So it's a totally negative, destructive type of mentality. And this is why whenever you try to pin down the left egalitarians on anything, they squirm away. And for them, it's totally a destructive enterprise of going around destroying this institution, destroying that institution, changing this, trying that, because they're just moving toward equality with no unifying principle whatsoever. Now, the probably the most pernicious and destructive, the thing I really want to focus on here is that the right egalitarians have, despite potentially their belief in Christianity or some kind of conservative principle, they have swallowed the Enlightenment whole, sometimes not even knowing it, and they go around promoting democracy. Okay, democracy, we're living in it. Okay, this is democracy. This is not oligarchic democracy. This is democracy itself. This is the nature of it. This is as good as it gets. You will see a lot of people making jokes about communists and Marxists, saying that not true communism, not true Marxism. We're just going to try it again next time, and it'll work. You'll see a lot of people on the right. A lot of Europeans and Americans make fun of communists and Marxists this way. Guys, it is exactly the same thing with democracy. This is as good as it gets. And this has been proved time and time again. Over 100 years ago, this was proved by, I want to say, Robert Michel and Vilfredo Pareto would be the main two. But a host, numerous other, anti-democratic writers going back probably all the way to the classical era. Go read Plato and Aristotle for a view of what the classics thought about democracy. To the extent that they ever did implement democracy in the classical world, it was not universal suffrage. It was not by popular will. It was a group of aristocrats and nobles who had a peerage and decided things amongst themselves, and quite often appointed dictatorial power to a person by the consent of a wide-based aristocracy. That's really what the so-called Athenian democracy was. And this modern liberal stuff, I can't believe people who would consider themselves to be right-wing traditionalists or religious types would promote democracy, because this is pure Freemasonry and pure Enlightenment ideology. Again, one of the other videos that I've recorded and I haven't released yet is from Anthony Ludovici, who is a Nietzsche scholar, died, I want to say, in the 1970s, but was already doing writing and translations in the 19 teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And this guy's got a short book on the false assumptions of democracy. And if you just give it the time of day, you'll see that the presumptions that you have to make in order to promote democracy as a form of government are Enlightenment Freemasonic assumptions. So how is it possible that you are going to both reject the revolution and embrace the revolution at the same time? It just doesn't work. It's preposterous. And so the left egalitarians, we know that they're the enemy. We know it. Everybody knows it. That's all anyone talks about. There's a gigantic cottage industry of people who live off of donations and Patreon tips and all this stuff attacking left egalitarians. But what we seem to have missed is that you really have to be scrupulous in who you listen to and who you follow to make sure they're not right egalitarians. Because in that case, you're only going halfway and you're never, ever going to succeed, because you're always going to drag the Freemasonic Enlightenment ideas along with you. Now, if you're a pagan or a secularist, there's no problem here. You just kill all this stuff and move forward. No problem. It's already been done. You can go listen to Jonathan Bowden, and he's already given you there before he died. He gave you plenty of explanations for how this works in practice. He's got an excellent description of how this works through natural law. You walk into a maternity ward, you look at all the infants, you see one that's hale and hearty, that's never going to be sick a day in its life. You see another one that's weak. It's going to be crippled. Okay? This is just the way that things are. Now, if you're a Christian, on the other hand, then you just have to move backwards in time. Go back. Read the Old Testament. Read the New Testament. Please come to the conclusion that egalitarianism, in any sort of physical, material, social, political sense, is not implied by these texts. The only way that it is implied is your personal relationship with God. And we're going to read, let me just say also, I've got Catholic support for this from Leo the 13th and Pope Pius the 12th. And the Orthodox support, it's quite obvious. They got national churches. Why would you need national churches if there was a one-size-fits-all egalitarian approach for Christianity and the faith? So any way that you come at this, you don't need these assumptions. They're not visible in the world itself. So where are they coming from? They're coming from the enemy, and we have got to purge ourselves from the bottom up of this ideology, or we'll never get past it. Okay, thank you guys.